Good morning, everyone. Kamarato Piskatava. We are up to Parakid Aleph, Mishna Ches. Hamakara Mikad Lakad. Someone has truma oil, and he's pouring it from one barrel to another. V'noitib shalosh tipin, and it dripped 3 drops. Noisin l'seicha chulin, you can now put into it non-truma oil. So when you empty your barrel, the flow diminishes from a steady stream to separate drops. The Mishna rules that once the pouring reaches the dripping stage and 3 drops have already fallen from the barrel, you may now put chulin into this almost empty barrel. It is not necessary to first wipe the barrel clean of any remaining truma residue. That is the explanation here, being read from the Yad of Ram. When you pour, there's a stream, then eventually there's just dripping. Once you come to that stage of dripping and 3 drops drip or drop, then we say that there's nothing more you have to do. You can now go ahead and put chulin oil into this emptied out barrel, even though there may still be some of the truma oil left. Nonetheless, at this point, you are allowed to add the chulin oil. Now, this is really very similar or exactly the case we had yesterday. And here, too, the issue is, well, how do you deal with those drops that are left of truma? And if it's going to work through bittul nullification, we know there's a principle that one may not intentionally nullify something forbidden into something that's permissible. And therefore, how would you be able to put into this emptied barrel the chulin oil when you would be relying on nullification to nullify the truma that's left in there, and that would be intentionally nullifying? So one answer is that being that your whole intention of putting the chulin oil here is to store it in this barrel, the purpose is not to nullify the oil. There, the principle of the prohibition of intentional nullifying something forbidden and something permissible doesn't apply. Now, clearly, the sages are only allowing this to be done at the point that you emptied it out. 3 drops already came, you're up to the 3 drops point, which means there is a small amount of oil that's left in there. There is where the sages said it's okay now to put chulin oil in there and to nullify the remaining truma oil, and it's not considered intentionally doing so. It's not the prohibition of intentionally nullifying prohibited, meaning in this case truma oil, into the regular oil, because that's not your intention to do. But this is only being said in this case after you emptied it out and you already had 3 drops and there's not that much left in there. Yesterday we also mentioned the Rambam has a different explanation here. And that explanation is that when so little is left and it's insignificant, it's like it loses its truma sanctity. Now, we're going to see something soon that shows that it's not exactly that what's left here is considered automatically nullified. It's like it's not here anymore. It's nothing. It completely loses its sanctity. We're going to see soon it's not that way. But rather, what it means here is that whatever prohibition there is in regard to destroying truma, when so little is left, such an insignificant amount is left, there's no issue with it. There's no issue with it when it's such a small amount left. Now, and I'll show you why I say this. Mishnah continues, Herkina umitza. Now, let's say after he emptied out the barrel and the 3 drops dripped out, he left it on its side. And what happened was now whatever oil was left in the barrel now pooled together. See, before you emptied it out, there are 3 drops. You now want to put it right side up. You want to fill it with more oil. We say you could. You don't got to wipe out whatever oil is left. Just put it in new oil. Here, though, after you emptied it, you left it on the side. And because of that, the oil that was still on the walls gathered into like a small pool. Harezu truma. In this case, we say that's truma. Once it already creates like a pool of oil, then we're not going to let you intentionally nullify this oil of truma with the chulin oil. Although, again, your intention is to store. But once the point came that it pooled together, now it stands out on its own as a significance, then the Chachamim said you cannot now go ahead and intentionally nullify it even though your intention is just to store, not to nullify. And according to the Rambam's explanation, this is where the Yad points out, according to the Rambam before, that said it's just insignificant. It has nothing to do with becoming nullified in the permissible oil. It's just that this oil, the oil left inside, has no significance. Well, once it pools together, it does have significance, which means, and I'll read it to you the way he says it here. Although any residue left after the 3 drops point is negligible and insignificant, and a Kohen may abandon that residue, its truma sanctity does not fall away. Therefore, when it accumulates, it may not be nullified by filling the barrel with chulin. So it's clear that the pshat is not that before it didn't have any sanctity of truma. It's just not significant enough that it should be a problem, so to speak, of abandoning it, of letting it become basically lost. Letting it get lost. That's why we say before there's no problem adding the chulin oil according to the Rambam explanation, because there's nothing significant here that we have to worry about becoming lost, becoming destroyed, so to speak. But once it already pools together, and again, it's a significant amount, so it's not like it lost its sanctity of truma before. It's just that he's allowed to abandon it. But now that it became something significant, and now you want to go ahead and say, well, I'm going to put in chulin oil that's going to nullify it. You can't do that. I have a significant amount, and I can't intentionally nullify it. So whenever that's the pshat here, according to the 2 explanations before, in this case where you left it on its side and the oil from the walls pulled together, why that is considered truma. Now that we have been mentioning small amounts of truma, in regard to what we've been discussing until now we bring in a totally unrelated law that again relates to small amount halacha, the laws that relate to a small amount of truma. Now, the kama tehei b'trumas meiser shel demai v'lechen l'kayin. How much trumas meiser of demai do you have to take it to the kohen? Okay, what are we talking about? Demai means like this: when you buy grain from a person called Amaretz, an ignorant person. So the question is, did he separate the trumas and the meisers from this? Can we rely on him to say that he took out the trumas and the meisers from this grain, that it's not tevel? When it comes to separating truma, we have no question. Even Amaretz, ignorant person, is going to separate. When it comes to meiser, though, even though we know that most ignorant people will separate meiser, there is a minority that we are suspect of not doing so. It's meiser, it doesn't have the same sanctity as truma, they're not as careful with it. Now, if you only separate truma from the grain and not the meiser, it's still tevel, it's still forbidden for you to eat. So therefore, the Chachamim instituted that when you buy grain from an Amaretz, from an ignorant person, that's called demai. It's a question. Has the meiser been separated or not? Is it tevel? Is it not? So you, who now buy the grain from this ignorant person, you have to separate the meiser. Got to separate the meiser because we don't know if it was done. We're concerned that maybe it wasn't done. It's tevel, so you have to do it. Now, you separated meiser. What do you do with it? Now, typically, when you separate meiser, the meiser that was supposed to have been separated by the person who sold it to you, that meiser, that tithing was supposed to go to the Levi. In this case, though, since it's demai, we don't really know if this is necessary to be done because perhaps this Amaretz did separate meiser. So it really comes out that from the point of the meiser going to a Levi, it's a monetary question. The meiser that we separate for a Levi has no prohibitions to it. Anybody can eat it. It's his property. It's his money. So in this case where it's demai, where we really don't know if we have to separate the meiser, so really the halacha is I can keep it. I have to separate it because I have to separate meiser in case it was meiser. So I have to separate, in case it needs to be separated, I have to separate it. But now there's a question, okay, I have the money of the Levi, right? I got to give it to him. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's not the money of the Levi. Maybe it's regular grain. And the principle is, if you want to take away money from someone, the burden of proof is on you, on the taker. Therefore, here, the Levi says, hey, you got to give it to me. It's meiser. We say to prove it because we have a doubt. We really don't know if this is meiser or not, if it was necessary. Since we have a question of tevel of this grain being prohibited, if meiser wasn't taken from it, you got to separate the meiser and to make sure it's done. And now we're sure there's no prohibition. But now to have to give it to the Levi because it's his money, he has to prove it. And therefore, if there's the doubt on the monetary status, It stays by me. I can eat it. I can keep it. Now, there's one thing though. If this is Meiser, as we've learned, 1/10 of the 10th has to go to the Kohen. And that's not just a question of money. That's a question of prohibition. This is, if there's Trumas Meiser in here, then a part of this, 1/10 of this 10th is actually forbidden to be eaten. And not only is it forbidden to be eaten, it's actual truma. It may be actual truma. What I'm left with when I separate 1/10 from 1/10 is not just a question in monetary means, in monetary issues. It's a question about this grain. Is it truma or not? May I eat it or not? And therefore, being that when it comes to the Trumas Meiser, that we have to separate, we have more than just a monetary question. We have a question about, is this sanctified grain? So I can't keep it. It may be sanctified grain. I have to give it to a Kohen. So again, this is the Mai. You bought it from Haaretz. We don't know if you separated Meiser from it. You have to separate Meiser in order for you to know that you can eat it. But even so, once you separated the Meiser, this Meiser has in it Trumas Meiser that has to go to the Kohen in case it's Meiser. And in case it is and now we just said that the Meiser itself, the tithing itself that you separated because you're in doubt, you can keep it. Because from the point of the Levi, it's just a question of his money. It's a doubt. If there's a doubt whether it's his money or not, I can keep it. There's only one problem. But if this is Meiser, I can't eat it because then there's Trumas Meiser in there. There's 1/10 of this 10th that has to go to the Kohen. That has the same status of Truma. I can't eat that. I can't eat that. And if I don't take care of it, I can't go ahead and eat this Meiser either. And if it's there, I got to give it to the Kohen. It is not just money. It's Truma. It's Truma. It has the sanctity of Truma, and it has to go to the Kohen. So here, the doubt, when it comes to the 10th of the 10th, what we call the Trumas Meiser, is a doubt. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's full-fledged Trumas Meiser. The 10th of the 10th has the sanctity of Truma. And if it does, I have to make sure it goes to the Kohen. I have to make sure it gets to a Kohen. So now in this case, where we're talking about the Mai, the Mishnah now said, how much Trumas Meiser of the Mai do I have to take it to the Kohen? What that means is that when it comes to the Mai, let me back up. When it comes to regular Truma, if you have regular Truma with you, you got to make sure to get it to a Kohen. Maybe the Kohen's going to come around and ask you for it, but you have to make sure to get it to a Kohen. Now, here we're talking about Trumas. Now, here we're talking about the Mai. It's a doubt whether I have to be doing anything here. And it's the Truma of the Meiser of the Mai. I have to separate the Meiser from the Mai. Now I got to take 1/10 of a 10th for the Kohen. But again, it's all in doubt. So the Mishnah now says, how much do you have to have in order to take it to the Kohen, which implies that a minute amount, there may be an amount that's very small, that you don't have, that the sages didn't obligate you to take it to the Kohen in the case of the Mai. Now, before we read the answer to this question, I think it's important to point out that there's one more condition about this case in the Mishnah that the Mishnah doesn't mention. The Bartanura mentions it. And that is, not only are we talking about the Mai here, we're talking about the Mai of grain that's tamei, which means that whatever Truma is here is actually going to be automatically tamei because it's coming from tamei grain. And there's really not much that the Kohen is going to be able to do with it. You know, if we're talking about oil, then he's going to be able to go ahead and use it for fuel. So that would be something you could do with Truma tamei. You can't consume it. You can't eat it. So when the case is that it's the Mai and it's tamei, that's when the Mishnah is going to tell us that if it's very small, you don't have to look for a Kohen to get it. But if it was not tamei, it was the Mai, but it was not tamei, or it was not the Mai, it was certainly Meiser. It was no question, it's tevel, and the Meiser has to be separated, and then the Trumas Meiser has to come from it. Even if that grain was tamei, but we know that it's for sure tevel, and for sure the Meiser has to be for sure separated from it, then it won't make any difference what the amount is. You have to look for a Kohen and get it to him. That's what you have to do. So the Mishnah that said, the Mishnah that says, how much Trumas Meiser of the Mai do you have to have that you need to get it over to a Kohen? Right? How much does this 10th of the 10th have to be that the Chachamim obligated you now to go and get it over to a Kohen? Echad mishmayna l'shminas, 1/8 of an eighth. That means we're starting like this. An eighth is the liquid volume measure of an eighth of a lug. Okay, and it says here an eighth of an eighth. So it's an eighth of an eighth of a lug. That means 1/64th of a lug is the minimum amount. It's a volume. That's the minimum amount of Trumas Meiser of Demai that has to be delivered to the Kohen. If you have that amount, meaning once you hit 1/64th of a lug of Trumas Meiser of Demai that is Tamei, once you hit that amount, then you got to get it over to a Kohen. If it's less than that amount, then you don't have to bring it to a Kohen. However, you have to guard it until a Kohen comes to get it, because again, it could be Truma, so you got to make sure it doesn't become Tamei. You need to hold on to it in case a Kohen shows up, you can give it to him, or until it decays. Once it decays, it's not going to have this. It's not going to be true. It's not considered Truma anymore. So if it's less than a 64th of a lug, you don't have to take it to a Kohen, but you have to hold on to it and protect it until a Kohen comes to get it or until it decays. But again, that's only when it's the Mai and it's Tamei. But let's say the case was it was the Mai, it wasn't Tamei, then even less this amount, you got to get over to a Kohen. Let's say it was for sure Trumas Meiser, and it's less than this amount. Even if it's Tamei, you got to get it to a Kohen. Mitzvahs asay lahafresh meiser ani b'shana shlishis v'shishis l'shmita achar shifresh meiser rishon. In the 3rd and 6th years that precede Shemitah, the second tithing that we do, again, start with new grain, you take Truma to the Kohen, the first meiser, the first tithing goes to the Levi. Now you get it with the second tithing. If it's a 3rd and a 6th year, it does not have the sanctity that we mentioned yesterday that takes place with the second meiser in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 6th, which you have in Yerushalayim. That doesn't happen in the 3rd and 6th year, but rather that second tithing that follows the first goes to the poor. Shenamar, as the pasuk states, Miketz Shalosh Shanim, at the end of 3 years, Toitzis Kol Maser Tivuascha B'Shana Hahi, you shall remove all the tithings of your grain in that year. V'nafta b'sharach, you should place it in your gates. Uva ha'levi came lechelek v'nachal imach. The Levi will come, for he has no portion or inheritance with you in the land. V'hager v'hayasem v'almana asher b'sharecha, and the stranger, the orphan, and the widow that are in your gates. So clearly here, this is talking about where at the end of the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle, any meiser that you haven't given out yet, you've separated, but you didn't give it out to the Levi, didn't give it out the meiser to the Levi, or didn't take meiser, or didn't take it to Yerushalayim. I believe it applies to that also. You don't have to take it out of your house and basically leave it outdoors. So the Torah says it's left for the Levi. Okay, that's the meiser rishon, and it's also left for the poor. Where do the poor come in? The answer is because during the 3rd and the 6th year, the second tithing goes to the poor. And if you didn't give it to them, you now leave it. You have to take it out of your house and leave it outside for them to come and get it. This idea of meiser ani, of giving to the poor, applies nowadays also. In a situation where there's a question whether these fruits, this produce, is actually obligated in tithing, then you separate it, but you don't have to give it to the poor. Like we said before, one who takes money away from his friend, the burden of proof is on him to show that he has the right to take it. So this meiser ani, again, once you separate it, it's just a question about being the property of the poor man. Being that we have a suffix whether it is, you can keep it unless some or another he could prove it otherwise. But that's going to be the situation when the grain that we're talking about, it's a question whether mice were taken from it, as we just discussed. In that situation, if it was the years of Meiser Sheni, and you had a suffix, you'd still have to deal with it, because that's a question of these fruits. you may have an obligation to take them to Yerushalayim and eat them there. So if you don't have a doubt about that obligation to do so, the Torah's obligation to do so, you have to do it. But when we're talking about the Meiser Ani, that goes to the poor, that is his money. But once you have a doubt about money, the burden of proof is upon the one taking away the money to prove that it's his. And I wish you all a Gemara Tova Pesach Tova today on Hoshana Rabbah. Wish you all a wonderful Yontif, a joyous Simchas Torah, and we'll meet again in Meretz Hashem Monday after all the Yom Tovim are over, starting into the winter, and hopefully that Hashem will bless us today on Hoshana Rabbah. The finality of the judgment will bless us with a year of health, happiness, and simchas. Take care.